In this course, you will be learning a lot of tools. You will be coding some business network applications. And to do that, you would need a development environment. The development environment can be created either by installing all the Hyperledger Fabric components on your machine, your desktop, your laptop, or you can use a virtual machine for creating the development environment. In this lecture, I'll describe both the environments, and then you will have to make a decision on whether you want to install Hyperledger Fabric natively or whether you want to go with the virtual machine based mechanism. Now keep in mind that it's not a mutually exclusive decision. You can decide to do both if you want. Let's start with this term, dependency hell. Dependency hell refers to a frustrating experience that the software developers have to go through when they are installing software that have dependency on other softwares or specific versions of other software. Unfortunately, in its current state, Hyperledger Fabric has a lot of dependencies. Before you can install your Hyperledger Fabric Docker containers, you need to have all of these softwares installed on your machine, which at times can be a challenge. Let me share the student experience with native installation of Hyperledger Fabric. Native installation means you will install the various components of Hyperledger Fabric on your own machine or in a virtual machine. What I have observed is that most of the time the Linux users are able to get their dev setup very quickly. And the reason is because most of the installation steps are automated. The Mac users are somewhere between the Windows users and the Linux users. The Windows users are the ones who struggle the most. There are many problems that have been reported and resolved in the past couple of months. So it's not that it doesn't work, it's just that it'll take you more time if you are on Windows to install and get your Hyperledger Fabric environment up and running. So the obvious question is, what are the choices? The choices are, you can have a native installation where the Hyperledger Fabric components are installed on your machine, or you can install Hyperledger Fabric in a virtual machine. I'll compare the two choices suggested here. The native installation requires you to carry out installation of various softwares, so it takes some time, especially if you run into issues. Virtual machine installation is quite fast compared to the native installation. Native installation requires you to execute certain manual steps, whereas virtual machine installation is all automated. Version clashes and other issues are common in the native installation, especially on the Windows platform, whereas the virtual machine installation is self-contained and the versions are managed internally. It's easy to clean up the virtual machine rather than to uninstall the various components on the native installation. So here is my suggestion, but the end decision is yours. If you're using a supported Linux OS, then go with the native installation. For Mac OS, go with the native installation. Even for the newer versions of Windows, such as Windows 10 Pro, go with the native installation. But if you're using Windows 10 Home or some earlier version of Windows, then I would suggest that you start with the VM-based setup and later do the native installation. The instructions for setting up Hyperledger Fabric in a virtual machine are covered in the lectures in this section. So continue with the lectures in this section if you are going with the VM-based installation. The native installation is covered in the next section. So what that means is that if you plan to go with the native installation, you can skip the rest of the lectures in this section and go straight to the next section. Dev setup overview. In this lecture, I'll talk about virtualization and the virtualization softwares that we are going to use for setup of the VM-based dev environment for Hyperledger Fabric. The two softwares that I'm going to discuss are the Oracle VirtualBox and the open source tool Vagrant. I'll also describe how the VM-based dev environment setup will work. Let's start with what is virtualization. Virtualization is a software simulation of the physical hardware. What that means is that on a single machine, you can create multiple virtual machines which are all implemented in software, and each of these virtual machines behave as if they are independent physical machines. To create the virtual machines on a single host machine or physical machine, you need to have a class of software on your machine known as the hypervisor. Hypervisor is the virtualization system that creates and runs the virtual machines. There are multiple hypervisor solutions available in the market today. The Oracle VirtualBox is a free hypervisor solution that we're going to use in this course. Now let's talk about how we will set up your machine. What we'll do is we will install the VirtualBox on your machine, and then we will create a virtual machine on which we will install Ubuntu. And then we will install all the Hyperledger Fabric components on it. But if you go in this direction, then to carry out all the development activities or to use the tools, we will always have to log into the virtual machine. And that can be very cumbersome. So the good news is that there is a better solution. Obviously, there is a trade-off, but it's a better solution. Let me explain how we will go forward. I call this setup the mix mode setup. In this setup, we will install the VirtualBox. We will also install the Vagrant. Don't worry if you don't know what Vagrant is. I'll explain in the next few minutes what Vagrant is. We will use Vagrant to create and manage the virtual machine. On the virtual machine, we will install Ubuntu and install some of the Hyperledger Fabric tools and components. And then we will install the Composer tools, the Node, and the Visual Studio for Code on the host machine. Now the good news is that you have already installed these tools. So this is the suggested way. And here what would happen is that we will use the Composer tool to connect with the Hyperledger Fabric components installed within the virtual machine by way of the TCP connections. The benefit of this approach is that it will give you the same development experience as a native installation. To execute the tools, you will not have to log into the virtual machine, and that will make things much easier. Now let's talk about what is Vagrant. Vagrant is a tool for building and managing virtual machine environments in a single workflow by way of automations. It's a command line tool, and the workflow for creating and managing the virtual machines is managed by way of a configuration file known as the Vagrant file. Virtual machines are created by executing the Vagrant commands. The Vagrant command checks the Vagrant file for getting the configuration for the virtual machine. Then it invokes the APIs on the VirtualBox to create the actual virtual machine. Anytime there is a need to change the configuration of the virtual machine, the Vagrant file is updated with the new configuration, and then the commands for Vagrant are re-executed to reconfigure the virtual machine. Let's summarize. In this lecture, I described the virtual machine based setup that I refer to as the mixed mode virtual machine setup. In this setup, we will have the Hyperledger Fabric installed on a virtual machine that will be set up with the Ubuntu OS. For virtualization, we will use the hypervisor Oracle VirtualBox, and to create and manage the virtual machines, we will use the open source tool Vagrant. All the Composer tools will be installed on the host machine, and they will connect to the Hyperledger environment by way of TCP connections. Good news is that you have already installed the Composer tools on the host. In the next lecture, you will learn how to install the Oracle VirtualBox and Vagrant tool. Virtual machine setup. In this lecture, I'll show you how to install the Oracle VirtualBox and Vagrant tool. You will also learn how to use the Vagrant commands. I'll show you some of the common commands in action. By the end of this lecture, you should have a VM set up on your machine. Now, before we proceed with the installation of Oracle VirtualBox, I just want to make sure that you are aware of the fact that you don't have to use VirtualBox. You can, in fact, use other virtualization softwares. So for example, if you are on Windows 10 Pro, you may use Hyper-V if it is enabled on your machine. In that case, you would not need to install VirtualBox. But if you are on Windows 10 Home version, then you will need to install the VirtualBox. If you already have some kind of a hypervisor on your machine, then in general, you don't need to install VirtualBox as long as your virtualization software is supported by Vagrant. So you'll have to check the documentation for Vagrant to see if your virtualization software will work or not. And also you will need to check if the Ubuntu Trusty 64 box is available for your virtualization software. If it is not, then you can use other Ubuntu images, but I will not be able to provide you full support for it because I am using Ubuntu Trusty 64 in this course. To install the Oracle VirtualBox, we'll carry out two steps. In the first step, we will check if the VirtualBox is already installed on your machine. If you installed Docker Toolbox, the VirtualBox is already installed on your machine because it's part of the Docker Toolbox installation. So in that case, you can skip the second step. But if you find that the VirtualBox is not installed on your machine, then you can go ahead and install it using the link I have provided here and in the resources. Let's carry out step number 1. Now I am on a Windows machine, and on Windows machine, you will find that the Oracle VirtualBox is installed under the folder Oracle VM VirtualBox. And here is my VirtualBox. So I already have it, but I'll show you how to install it using the download link, which is available in the resources for this lecture. I've already copied the link to my clipboard, so I'm going to just paste it. This is the download page for the Oracle VirtualBox. The Oracle VirtualBox is available for Windows hosts, OS X, Linux, and Solaris. I'm on Windows, so I'll just click on Windows. This will take a few minutes. It'll download the setup file for VirtualBox. Once it has downloaded, simply double click on it and follow the instructions. I'll select all the defaults and just hit next and it'll install it. Once the VirtualBox is installed on your machine, create a short link to it on your desktop, as you will be using it quite often. Here you can see I have a couple of virtual machines which are already running on VirtualBox. You may or may not see any virtual machine on your VirtualBox console, and that is fine. Next, we will install Vagrant. Vagrant is available on these platforms. The installation link is available in the resources for this lecture. On the installation page, you will find the link to the Vagrant download page. And here you can select the appropriate platform. For me, it's Windows 64-bit. So I'm going to just click on that. It'll start to download the MSI package for Windows. And then we will just double click on this package and install Vagrant on the machine. Once the package has downloaded, simply launch it, follow the instructions, use the defaults, and Vagrant will be installed on your machine. As a next step, you will clone the Vagrant repository from the link provided in the resources. You can either use the git clone command or you can download the zip file from here. Once you have downloaded or cloned the repository, open it in Visual Studio Code. I've already done it, so let me go to Visual Studio Code. I've opened the HLF Vagrant dev setup folder in Visual Studio Code. The most important file here is Vagrant file. This is the configuration file used by the Vagrant commands for setting up and managing the virtual machine. In this file, there is a configuration vm.box, which refers to the type of virtual machine OS which will be used. So we're going to use Ubuntu Trusty 64, which is a 64-bit Ubuntu image. And these are the synced folders. These are the folders on your local drive which will be available under the virtual machine. This is the configuration for the ports that are forwarded to your local host and will be used by the configuration of the composer tools. The subfolder scripts has some scripts that we will use for installation of the various components, and there is a utility under the util folder devutil.js. You will see these utilities and scripts in action in the next lecture. Before we move on to the next step, I'll quickly go over some of the Vagrant commands that you will be using in this course. The link to the Getting Started document for Vagrant is available in the lecture resources. I suggest that you go through the documentation to understand what all you can do with Vagrant. In this course, you will be primarily using 4 commands. The first command is the Vagrant up, which starts up the virtual machine. Second command is Vagrant halt, which gracefully shuts down the virtual machine. So it is not removed. It is still there at any point in time. you can again invoke vagrant up and the virtual machine will be brought up. Vagrant SSH will allow you to log into the virtual machine, and vagrant destroy will delete the virtual machine. Once you destroy the virtual machine, anything that you installed on that virtual machine is gone. So let's try out these commands. In the VirtualBox Manager, all my machines show up as powered off. So we're going to use the command vagrant up to launch our virtual machine. And to do that, I'll use the integrated terminal under view. Just type the command vagrant up. Keep in mind that all vagrant commands need to be executed in the root folder for this project. Now, if you already have Ubuntu Trusty 64, the virtual machine creation will take a few seconds or up to a minute. But if you don't have the Ubuntu Trusty 64 image on your machine, for example, when you're running this command for the first time, it'll take up to a couple of minutes for downloading the image. So you need to be a little patient. Now the virtual machine has been successfully created. If you look at the VirtualBox Manager, you will find that we have one virtual machine running. Now, another thing that you will observe is that there is a new folder here, .vagrant. This is the folder under which all the data for this virtual machine is getting stored. As I indicated earlier, all vagrant commands need to be executed in the root folder of this project. Let's go ahead and use the command vagrant SSH to log into the box. And at this point, we have logged into the box. And you can, execute all kind of Unix commands here. You will see that there are two folders, scripts and workspace. If you look into scripts, this folder is actually mapped to the scripts folder that I showed to you earlier. This is the folder. So that's what is showing up here. So just wanted to show you that the local file system is mapped into the virtual machine. To log out of the virtual machine, simply type log out and we are logged out now. To destroy, just call vagrant destroy. It'll ask you for the confirmation, yes, and the virtual machine is now destroyed. So this is how the vagrant commands are used. Let's summarize. In this lecture, I talked about the installation of the Oracle VirtualBox. Oracle VirtualBox is used for creation of the virtual machines. And I also talked about Vagrant and its installation. Vagrant is a tool that is used for automating the workflow for creation and management of configuration for the virtual machines. I also walked you through 4 commands which will be used in this course. The vagrant up starts the virtual machine, vagrant SSH logs into the virtual machine, vagrant destroy destroys the virtual machine, and vagrant halt halts the virtual machine. I suggest that you go through the documentation of Vagrant to understand how Vagrant works and the multiple other commands that are available in Vagrant. Hyperledger Fabric installation on the virtual machine. In this lecture, you will learn how to install the prerequisites or dependencies on the virtual machine, and you will also learn how to install the Fabric tools and Composer tools in the virtual machine. Hyperledger Fabric installation on the virtual machine will require us to execute 3 tasks. The first task is the prereq installation, second task is the Fabric tools installation, and the third task is the set of post-install steps that we need to execute. In this lecture, I'll show you how to carry out the prerequisite installation and Fabric tool installation. The post-install steps I'll show you in the next lecture. Before I proceed with the lecture, I would like to indicate that I have used 2 prompts in the videos. The first prompt is this one, and when you see this, that means the command is being executed on the host machine. So if you're on Windows, you would execute this command on the PowerShell or the command window. And in the case of Mac and Linux, you will execute this command on the terminal window. When you see this prompt, that means the command is being executed in the VM. That is, after you have logged into the Vagrant by using the command vagrant SSH. And so this command will be executed on the VM terminal prompt. The prerequisite installation involves execution of a script that installs all of the dependencies in the virtual machine. This step generally takes between 15 to 30 minutes. The Fabric Tools installation step involves execution of a script that downloads the Fabric tools and installs them in a folder. This step generally takes less than 2 minutes. Prerequisite installation is a two-step process. In the step 1, we have to execute the command vagrant up that starts the virtual machine. In step number 2, we execute the prerequisite install script. And to do that, we call the command vagrant ssh, log into the VM, and simply execute the install-prereqs.sh script, which is available under the scripts folder. And once the execution has completed, simply log out and log back in. Let's go ahead and execute the command vagrant up. This will create the virtual machine. So this will take roughly a minute if you already have the Ubuntu image on your machine. At this point, our virtual machine is up. So let's go ahead and carry out step number 2. Vagrant ssh, logged in, clear. And now let's just run the script install prereq.sh. Now this will take some time. It's going to download all the dependencies and install on the virtual machine. Now all our dependencies have been installed. As you can see, these are the dependencies that have been installed. The next step is to log out of the virtual machine and then log back in. To log out, we will simply type logout, clear, and log back in, vagrant ssh. And we are ready for the next step. The Fabric Tools installation is a two-step process. In step number 1, you log into the virtual machine using the command vagrant ssh. In step number 2, you execute the Fabric Tools install script. There are two scripts that you need to execute: install-fabric-tools.sh and install-composer.sh. This second script will install the Composer tools on the virtual machine. Now you already have the Composer tools installed on your host machine, but we will install it in the virtual machine also so that you can try it on both the virtual machine as well as on the host. I've already logged into the virtual machine, so I'm going to just execute install-fabric-tools.sh. This will take roughly 2 minutes to finish. At this point, our installation of the Fabric tools is complete, and you will see that there is a new folder under your HLF Vagrant Dev Setup project with the name Fabric-tools. This folder is mapped to the folder workspace under the virtual machine. So if I go to workspace and do a ls here, as you can see, the Fabric-tools folder is there. Next, we need to install the Composer tools, and for that we will execute the script install composer.sh. This step takes generally 5 to 10 minutes. At this point, our setup is complete, so we need to log out and log back in. So log out, vagrant ssh to log in, and now we are ready for the next step. Let's summarize. In this lecture, I showed to you how you can install the prerequisites in the virtual machine and also how you can install the Fabric tools and Composer tools in the virtual machine. At this point, your virtual machine should have the prerequisites as well as the Fabric tools installed on it. Hyperledger Fabric post-install steps. In this lecture, you will learn all the post-install steps that you need to carry out. Before I proceed with the lecture, I would like to indicate that I have used two prompts in the videos. The first prompt is this one, and when you see this, that means the command is being executed on the host machine. So if you're on Windows, you would execute this command on the PowerShell or the command window. And in the case of Mac and Linux, you will execute this command on the terminal window. When you see this prompt, that means the command is being executed in the VM. That is, after you have logged into the Vagrant by using the command vagrant ssh. And so this command will be executed on the VM terminal prompt. The first thing that we are going to do is download the Fabric Docker images. And to do that, we'll log into the virtual machine using the vagrant ssh, then execute the script download fabric.sh. And this will pull the images for Fabric and install in the virtual machine registry. The Fabric Tools installation script makes a change to the .profile file in the virtual machine. So what that does is it'll take you to the fabric-tools directory by default when you will log in. The first step you need to carry out is change the permission for the shell scripts. So simply type change mode 755 star.sh, and now we are ready to download our Docker images. So just execute download fabric.sh. This will take some time. It may take up to 45 minutes if you have a slow connection. So you have to be very patient with this one. At this point, all the Fabric images for Docker have been successfully pulled. Next, we're going to install the peer admin card. To install the peer admin card, you have to carry out two steps. The first step is to set up the utility. To do that, you have to change the directory to the util subfolder under the HLF Vagrant project that you have set up on your local machine. Then you have to carry out the installation of the node packages for the utility. So that will be done by way of npm install command. Second step will be to create the peer admin card by launching the utility. To launch the utility, you will use the command node devutil.js. I've already changed the directory to the util folder. Let's run the command npm install. This will pull all the node packages in the project. npm install has successfully pulled the packages. Let's clear. To create the peer admin card, you need to use node devutil.js. So launch the utility, and the very first option is install peer admin card. No cards found. That is because we don't have any card on the machine, and it has created the peer admin card now. Now we are good to use our composer tool against the Hyperledger Fabric dev environment. You may use this utility for carrying out other tasks as well. For example, you can delete all the cards from your machine. You can list the cards on disk, and when you list the card, you will see that now we have one card, which is the peer admin card. Now you'll learn about the cards in later lectures. Now we will be using the Docker tool installed on the host machine to check the status of the containers to get information about the containers in the virtual machine. And to do that, we will have to set up some environment variables on the host machine. If you're using a Linux or a Mac machine, then you need to make a change to your .profile file such that the Docker host environment variable is set to tcp://localhost:2375, and make sure that the docker_tls_verify variable is unset. Because if it is not unset, then you will get errors when the Docker client on the host machine will try to connect to the Docker daemon in the virtual machine. If you are on Windows, then you can make use of the control panel for making changes to the environment variables. So here I have set the docker_host, and you will observe something interesting here. Instead of removing docker_tls_verify, I have renamed it. So you can either rename it or remove it. Both will work. To validate if the setup is working, simply run the command docker images on your host machine, not in the virtual machine, and it should show the images for the Hyperledger Fabric and any other image that you may have. So I've launched a Windows PowerShell, and I'm simply going to check if the images can be retrieved from the virtual machine, Docker images, and as you can see, there are 5 images that have been downloaded by the download fabric.sh script. If you're on Linux or Mac, then make sure that you reboot your machine. Otherwise, the environment variables will not take effect. Please note that some of the Docker extensions on Visual Studio Code do not work in this setup. So you will need to use the Docker commands on the host machine, or you can use this extension. Just be aware that although the extension shows you all the containers, images, and other information in Visual Studio Code, but there are still some known issues. In this last step, we're going to validate our dev environment setup, and to do that, we'll log into the virtual machine using the Vagrant SSH. Then we are going to execute the shell script start fabric.sh. This will start all the Fabric components in Docker containers. Then we're going to check the status of the containers using the docker ps and docker logs command on the host machine, and then we'll shut down the environment using the stopfabric.sh script file. Let's go ahead and log in. Vagrant SSH. The login was successful. Let's clear. And now we will run start fabric. This will take roughly 30 seconds to get the environment up. Make sure you don't get any errors here. And our environment is now up. I've launched the Windows PowerShell on my host machine, and let's do a Docker PS to check the containers. So we can see the 4 containers are up. This is the container for the peer. This is the container for CA. This is the container for CouchDB. And this is the container for the orderer. Now, if you want to check the logs, you will simply say docker logs --tail. Let's say I want to get 10 lines of the log file. These will be the last 10 lines. And then we need to provide the container's name. So I can just take the container name from here, paste it. And these are the last 10 lines from the logs for the peer container. So at this point, we can safely assume that our environment is up and healthy. To shut down the environment, simply log into the virtual machine and execute the shell script stopfabric.sh, and you will see the script will shut down all the containers.